Our nightmare neighbor attempts to take our home, only to get hit with a $200,000 bill as karma catches up with her. All right, before we dive in, let's meet the key players in this story. From now on, we'll refer to the entitled neighbor as N and their spoiled son as S for the entitled son. The previous owner of our house will also be present, referred to as PO, even if their role is somewhat minor in this narrative. Just a heads up while you dive into this story, the timeline from when we purchased the house to now spans nearly 15 years. Unless it's mentioned otherwise, you can pretty much take it for granted that there was a significant gap between the majority of events that occurred. Time to dive in. To really set the scene and build up to the climax, I need to provide some background first. A lot of this went down before we purchased and settled into this place. N had a massive piece of land situated just down the road from a well-loved recreational lake in our area. I mean, when I say down the road, it's more like a solid trek ahead. Despite the fact that the road N lives on is the sole access point to several lakefront properties and resorts, it also happens to be home to the most frequented boat dock on this side of the lake. The properties in this area aren't so overpriced that regular folks can't buy them, but just a bit further down, there are some seriously pricey places with wealthy individuals cruising by constantly. This will come into play later in the narrative. Taryn, with her considerable wealth and extensive property holdings, decided to divide her estate into 4 approximately equal parts when her children reached adulthood. She handed one to her daughter, who, against all odds, turns out to be a pretty decent person, especially when you look at the rest of her family. Then she handed over another section to S. She constructed homes for them on each of the properties, closely following her children's specifications. So, on the 4th piece of land, the one without her own house, she decided to put up a small convenience store. This detail will come into play later. Honestly, I can't quite figure out the reasoning behind it. Maybe it was to sidestep any potential conflicts down the line or something like that, but she ultimately decided to hand over the deeds to her kids for their individual houses and properties. It's pretty clear what direction this is headed in. Honestly, respectable daughter was quite the example of respectability. S, or maybe I should just call him the irresponsible son, was totally a party maniac. Everyone in the neighborhood totally despised him back then. He would blast music and host wild parties late into the night, keeping everyone up and making it impossible to get any sleep. It seems like the cops had a presence in the area since they were getting called on him all the time. It likely didn't do him any favors that his mom covered all the bills, keeping everything under her name. All the bills, water, electric, garbage, everything just piled up in her mailbox. Except for one, of course. Since the property was under his name, he was responsible for the property tax, which he completely ignored and never passed on to N. It seems like N either overlooked it or thought he was covering the cost himself. Honestly, it was pretty predictable when the cops rolled up to his place. But it all changed when he didn't return, and the house ended up going to auction. The house was a complete disaster at this point. There were some serious holes in the drywall, and the living room floor had a massive gap that went straight down into the garage and basement area. The kitchen floor and subfloor had to be completely redone, and nearly all the walls were caked in mud. His careless behavior and party lifestyle really left the house in a state that the banks deemed unlivable. As a result, the only ones who could swing it were those who could cover the costs out of their own pockets. Step into the POPO. I used to flip houses, but not like those big-time wealthy folks you see on TV. It was more of a hobby for me, really. After retiring, he started flipping houses to stay engaged and active. PO, I'd totally scoop up a place like this at an auction for a steal, renovate it myself, and then flip it for a profit. As he worked on renovations, he relied on the earnings from the last property. Usually by the time he wrapped up one project and moved on to the next, his profits were nearly depleted. Whatever he had remaining just got tossed into a backup savings stash. He mentioned it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. So we were looking for a new place, but our budget was tight, you know? Then we stumbled upon this listing online, and it looked like it was made for us. The size was just right, the neighborhood was ideal, and it was even close to the lake, which is awesome since we love fishing and boating. Honestly, it felt like it checked all the boxes. Or at least it seemed that way. We were totally anxious about the price since it wasn't posted on the site yet. But hey, it wouldn't be a bad idea to check it out and see what's up. We swung by to check it out and spotted P.O. "We're on it." Just popped in to say hello and check out the price. He mentioned that he intended to renovate it and put it on the market, and that his realtor had simply added it to the website's database to streamline the process for when he was ready to sell. So we ended up sitting down and having a chill conversation with him. He was super friendly, and you could tell he really appreciated the company. We mentioned that we were open to purchasing it from him at a fair price, taking into account its current state and the effort he had already invested in it. He had it nearly done, and we shared how excited we were to complete it and make it our forever home. He declined our offer, saying he had multiple offers on the table and didn't think it was fair to sell it to us. He mentioned we could purchase it at full price once he was done with it. We expressed our gratitude and left our number, hoping he'd reach out if he reconsidered. He totally said he would, right? Just under 2 weeks later, we surprisingly received a call from him. He mentioned that his sister was unwell in a different state, and he felt the need to be there for her. He also noted that he wouldn't have the time or patience to complete the house project. He mentioned that the house didn't meet the code requirements, but if we could figure out a way to purchase it, he'd be willing to sell it to us at a fair price. We totally agreed and started our search for banks. So we got hooked up with some leads from a realtor buddy of ours, and he actually helped us track down a bank that was cool with giving us a loan to buy the house. But there were a few strings attached, so we've got a tight 2-week window to get the house up to code, or else they might default on the loan and end up auctioning it off. After I laid out the whole situation to the PO, he was totally on board and offered to help however he could. He wasn't able to do any actual work on the house since he was in a hurry, but he laid out precisely what we needed to do to get it up to code and meet the basic requirements, detailing the time, effort, and costs involved. He even suggested lending a hand in another way. We secured a loan for double the amount he really wanted for the house, and he returned the extra half to us. We put that cash towards fixing up the house. Given all the effort he had already invested, the house was nearly up to code, and we could have tackled it ourselves. But just to be safe, we brought in a few friends and wrapped it up in half the time. Once we got everything up to standard, there was still a ton of work left to tackle. We ended up spending months replacing the flooring and subflooring, along with redoing the wiring, creating openings in the walls to swap out the old, hideous wallpaper that was literally falling apart and glued right onto the drywall. You're catching on. We really poured our hearts into this place. Finally, the moment arrived to settle into our dream home. Sure, it had a few quirks that we planned to tackle later, but that was all part of the adventure. But the moment had finally arrived to settle in. We hadn't even wrapped up the moving process when Anne popped by to say hello. While we were trying to sort things out with the PO in the tight time frame we had, he kept cautioning us repeatedly about Anne and her sense of entitlement. Initially, Anne was super friendly, and we couldn't understand why PO had given us so many warnings about her. And then it went down. As we were finishing our chat, she kindly and compassionately informed us that the house was actually hers and that we had 30 days to vacate. She mentioned feeling sorry for us because we got scammed so badly, but then she dropped the bomb that it was actually her house and the previous owner had no right to sell it to us in the first place. We had come across plenty of nightmare tales about folks getting scammed like that, so you can picture our panic when she laid it all out for us. It was absolutely gut-wrenching to think that after pouring so much time, effort, and money into our dream house, we were on the verge of losing it all because we got duped by some scammer. We expressed our gratitude for her clear explanation and kindness, mentioning that we would reach out to the bank and post office to sort everything out. So here's the deal. We reached out to the bank, and they confirmed that PO was indeed the rightful owner of the deed. We also chatted with the realtor, and they backed that up too. We talked to the PO, who shared that they were accused of stealing the house multiple times after purchasing it at auction, and that they faced constant harassment from her regarding the property. Every single person we talked to had the same tale to tell. We actually went to the courthouse and checked to make sure our name was on the deed. It was during this time that we got to hear the backstory about S from a bunch of neighbors. N showed up shortly after and wanted to know when we'd be out of here. We made it clear that this situation would never occur since we legally owned the property, and it wasn't our fault that S lost it. We expressed our condolences for her loss and acknowledged how difficult it must be to lose her family property due to her son's negligence. However, we made it clear that this situation was not our responsibility, and we weren't going to hand over a property that we had purchased with our own hard-earned money and put so much effort into renovating. So N figured out that we were aware of what was going on and launched into this lengthy tale about how this property had been in her family for ages. She went on about how she couldn't stand the thought of losing it and how P.O. had taken it from them during the chaos of their kid getting arrested. We were curious why they didn't place a bid on the house and repurchase it after he lost it. Given that we purchased it from P.O. for around $50K and he was still turning a small profit after all the work and materials he invested before selling it to us, it's clear they could have snagged it for practically nothing at auction and reclaimed it, and expressed that they believed the house and property were being taken from them and that they were unwilling to pay for something that truly belonged to them. We said sorry again, but made it clear that we weren't about to take a hit on the property, especially after all the time and effort we invested and the extra materials we purchased just to keep her satisfied. We totally understood her situation and decided to sell the house to her for a really fair price, $100K. Given its location and the amount of work put into it, that was still only a bit more than half of what it was actually worth on the market. After purchasing it for $50K and investing an extra $30K in materials, along with several months of hard work to renovate, we believed that was a fair price. We didn't mention it, but we would totally be open to dropping it to $90K if she wanted to talk it over with us. She quickly shot back with a counteroffer of $40K, arguing that she shouldn't have to pay a dime for something that rightfully belongs to her. When we pointed out that the offer was way too low, she replied that she recognized the effort we put in and acknowledged the expenses we incurred for materials to improve the place. So she decided to be generous and add an extra $10K for all the work we did on the house. So when we mentioned that we bought the house for $50K from the previous owner, she totally flipped out. She accused us of being liars and thieves, claiming the place was a total dump and that there was no way it could be worth that much. She not only started throwing around insults, but she even went so far as to label our dream home a dump after all the hard work, effort, and money we invested in it. We had enough of her nonsense and politely told her to leave our home, making it clear that she was no longer welcome and that we would never sell our house to her, even if she offered us twice its worth. She clearly lost her cool over this and hurled a bunch of insults at us as she stormed out the door. Eventually, we discovered that she was going around the neighborhood spreading all sorts of ridiculous rumors about us, claiming we had stolen the house from her and other nonsensical things. Initially, we brushed it off, assuming nobody would take it seriously. Then, out of nowhere, a guy rolled into our driveway, brandishing a gun and demanding we get out immediately. We had never crossed paths with him, but his name definitely rang a bell. He seemed to think of himself as the neighborhood's Mike, ready to confront anyone stirring up trouble like this. In our neighborhood, a lot of folks thought he was a decent guy. Given that we live in a rural area with quite a few not-so-law-abiding citizens, his presence was definitely valued by most people. He really put in the effort to maintain peace in the neighborhood and honestly did a lot more than the police usually do, most of the time anyway. Just a heads up, our neighborhood is divided into two main parts. There's this one area that's mostly populated by older folks who are retired. It's super nice and chill, and everyone seems to get along really well. The other is packed with those who tend to bend the rules, deeper in the wild and out of sight from nosy onlookers. We enjoy being on the outskirts of the tranquil area. With roughly a mile of woods and fields in between, we heard about him and, based on the descriptions, figured it might be the same guy. So we decided to put that theory to the test. We let him know we were totally clueless about the situation and offered him a beer and a chance to chat. We let him bring his gun, but we made it clear that we would be bringing our own too. It seems like nearly everyone around here owns a firearm. It's pretty wild to think that there are more places to buy guns than there are dollar stores, right? Honestly, we weren't too concerned about him carrying a gun. It doesn't hold much weight around here. It's more like a statement of, I've got the means to protect myself if things go sideways. If someone had aimed it at you, which he didn't, then we would be talking about a whole different situation. Let's get back to the main story. He was on board, and after a few hours of back and forth, he laid it all out, saying he had a hunch it was something along those lines and offered an apology for the mix-up. He said he got swept up in the gossip and had a moment of realization, promising it wouldn't happen again. He expressed his gratitude for our purchase, noting that when the problematic individual moved out, the overall atmosphere improved significantly. He was spared from the constant grumbling about blaring music and inebriated teens weaving down the street at ungodly hours, almost getting hit by cars. We all ended up chuckling about it later, and he just walked away without saying anything else. Here's the scoop on why Mr. Mike fell for those rumors so quickly. This is somewhat of a tangent, but it marks a significant shift in the moment when things began to unravel for Anne. Just a heads up, the happenings in this side story do intersect a bit with what goes down in the next part of the narrative. All right, let's dive in. So I brought up that Karen divided a quarter of her property to set up a convenience store. This store was totally a hotspot in the neighborhood. Being right in the middle, it was honestly in an ideal spot. They didn't gain popularity because of their prices. In fact, they charged quite a bit more than necessary for everything. Their customer service wasn't a strong point either, mostly consisting of a simple thank you as you exited the store. At times, they'd actually refund you if you discovered mold on the food you purchased from them, which is a decent gesture, I suppose. Anyway, they were super popular since they were the only convenience store around for ages. If you needed to grab some groceries but didn't feel like making the trek to town, they were usually just a quick jaunt away for most folks. Honestly, we've totally set aside our differences and ended up shopping there quite a few times. They were basically right next door to us, no doubt about it. But other than that, their little shop really gained a lot of traction and built a solid reputation in our community. Super uplifting. Everyone was fiercely protective of their beloved little store, ready to challenge anyone who dared to take it away from them. I guess I can sort of understand where they're coming from. And that was the time when everyone believed Karen and her family were really decent folks. When Karen began to spread rumors, folks really took notice. The chatter about us supposedly taking an entire house from her just fizzled out because, honestly, everyone realized how absurd that was. Overall, the majority of folks still had faith in her. However, folks totally bought into the other rumors, and let me tell you, there were a ton of them. But it was mostly just trivial nonsense that nobody really gave a damn about. Honestly, even if all the gossip about us was spot on, there's a lot more to unpack about some other folks around here. No one really seemed to care about them at all. They totally steered clear of us, especially since Karen had some serious issues with us. Nobody wanted to get on her bad side, fearing they might get banned from her store, so they just pretended we weren't there and let us do our own thing. After a few years, S finally got out of prison, and with nowhere else to turn, Karen let him move back in. She was totally against the thought of him staying with his mom, so she got him an apartment right above her convenience store. Plus, she made it crystal clear that wild parties on her property were off the table from now on. He totally didn't even have to pay rent, though. He just needed to manage the store for them during their busy times, which honestly didn't happen that frequently. Yet, despite everything that went down, it's clear that Karen still hasn't grasped the lesson. During his time at the register, he frequently charged customers twice for items and kept the extra cash for himself. We've encountered this multiple times and decided to go back for a refund. They constantly claimed that the register was malfunctioning. After spotting a trend, we decided to bring this up with Anne, informing her that her son was charging people twice for items and likely keeping the extra money for himself. Despite Anne's somewhat entitled attitude, she never crossed the line into doing anything blatantly illegal, and we genuinely appreciated her little store and wanted to see it thrive. Instead of expressing gratitude for our heads up, she dismissed our concerns, suggesting we were just imagining things, and politely told us to take a hike. We totally went along with her request, no problem at all. We also passed the info along to a few friends in the area. It took ages for some of them to even acknowledge our existence, let alone engage in conversation, all because of Anne. But we had finally found some people to hang out with. Delivering festive goodies to your neighbors annually is a great way to spread some cheer and make someone's day a little brighter. So they expressed their gratitude, but it was clear they were skeptical about it all. But word got around the neighborhood pretty fast. And just like that, Mr. Mike showed up. He showed up in our driveway once more. This time he was way more chill, just brushing off the rumors about us since he knew most of them were totally made up. We've had a few chats with him since then, mostly just casual and friendly. Nothing too serious. He would swing by occasionally for a beer, just to shoot the breeze about what was going on in the neighborhood and get our take on a few topics. He made it a point to connect with nearly everyone at least once a year, keeping the vibe chill and ensuring everything stayed on track. He wasn't a fan of the cops loitering around, so he decided to take matters into his own hands and do their job more effectively, hoping they'd have less to do. Honestly, it seems like everyone, us included, was totally on board with this setup. It allowed you to let your kids stroll down to the lake on their own, even in the sketchy areas of the neighborhood. That being said, he was definitely not a fan of the gossip we were sharing about our neighbors, particularly regarding their little shop. He mentioned that he had already spoken to them, and they believed it was merely a misunderstanding caused by register issues. He suggested that if we wanted to avoid any problems, we should put an end to those rumors immediately. We were looking to provide him with some solid evidence, but we figured he likely wouldn't buy it even if we told him. He was really into Karen and usually trusted her more than us, so since they dismissed it as a registration error, there was likely nothing we could say to change his mind. We came to an understanding and expressed our apologies for any misunderstandings, clarifying that our intentions were rooted in feeling wronged and a genuine desire to look out for the few friends we had in the area. He took the apology, gave us one last warning, and then just walked away without saying mo. We heard what was said and decided to cut back on shopping there unless it's totally necessary. But then, a few years later, everything took a turn. Once we brought it up, the whispers started circulating throughout the neighborhood. Despite Mr. Mike going around claiming that the rumors were all lies spread by us due to our property dispute with Ann, it's hard to ignore the situation. I'll touch on that a bit later, but it's interesting how folks began to really scrutinize their receipts after shopping there and started picking up on the same trends we noticed. During this period, it's likely that significant sums of money were tucked away, and Karen was undoubtedly aware of it but opted to remain silent, attempting to hush people up with gossip instead. But you know, the thing about those little country shops is that they're totally reliant on the locals who frequent their spot in the neighborhood. In the summer, when everyone is out enjoying their vacations and having a blast, they rake in some serious cash. But honestly, it's just not enough to get them through the winter months. And then it went down. Mr. Mike has finally put the pieces together, and wow, he was furious. We could hear him next door, just letting loose with some serious cursing right to their face. And then there he was, still going at it. Seriously, you have no idea how incredibly satisfying that felt. But that was just the start. He didn't just lose it on them, he went around the neighborhood that very day, making sure everyone knew what was happening. He even brought a stack of receipts to show anyone who wanted evidence. In the neighborhood, if anyone had more trust than Ann, it was definitely Mr. Mike. In just a single day, he managed to totally wreck their business. No one in the neighborhood shows up anymore. They managed to do quite well during the summer, thanks to vacationers and those winter birds that were completely clueless. But once winter rolled in and the crowds disappeared, they began to lose money fast. After 2 winters, they had no choice but to shut down their store during the cold months. But that also meant they had to toss out over 90% of their inventory each fall and restock everything fresh come spring. Looks like that decision wasn't the best move financially, and they ended up shutting down for good after just 3 more years. That's when their standing in the community really began to drop. And because of that, folks began to show us more respect, and we could actually make some friends without needing to go above and beyond. Finally, folks started to pay attention to us instead of acting like we were some kind of curse. But that was only the start of Ann's decline. Sadly, to reach the peak of the narrative, I have to lay down some additional groundwork first. Apologies for the lengthy response, but I promise this won't take too much of your time. Let me tell you, Karen is just the definition of nosy. I mean, she takes it to a whole new level. It's impossible to step outside without her keeping tabs on us, from her window or heading out herself to walk her dog, tend to her lawn, or pull weeds. Whatever excuse she can think of in the moment. It's almost a sure thing that whenever we're out and about on our property, she's right there with us. We're not hiding anything, but let's be real, we're not exactly on friendly terms with her, and it's pretty uncomfortable having someone watching our every move. We're thinking about putting in a small pool and hot tub in the backyard, and honestly, we just want to chill without feeling like we're on display in our swimsuits. We decided to check out some options for a privacy fence. In the spirit of being good neighbors, we let Karen know about our plans to put up a fence. She was pretty firm in her disapproval, but we made it clear that we would be installing a privacy fence regardless. Still, we had to share a space with her, so we suggested having a chat about the fence details, like the color, shape, and all that good stuff. We aimed to ensure she wouldn't have to look at something she found unattractive all day, especially since it seemed like gazing at our property was her favorite hobby. Honestly, we still make an effort to be the best neighbors possible, despite all the nonsense she's put us through. Anyway, let's get back to the story. To avoid any potential disputes regarding the fence placement, we're planning to install it a foot inside our property line all along the boundary. Just to clear things up, this is still before S got out of jail. We went to the courthouse and paid for a copy of the deed along with a map of our property lines. We were totally taken aback to discover that roughly a third of our property was being claimed by Anne. She had a tiny shed on it and even a garden. Can you believe that? So there's this line of trees that actually runs through our property. It's not your typical rectangular property like you see in some places. It's more of a half hexagon or trapezoid shape. Strange property lines are totally a thing around here. So there's this line of trees that runs through a section of our property. According to the deed and property map, it's supposed to be this little triangle area, but the trees actually make it look more like a square. Karen was asserting that the area beyond the trees was her personal property. When we mentioned this to her, she totally lost it again, accusing us of being liars and thieves and throwing around all sorts of other insults. We weren't too concerned about that property since we had been living here for years, believing it actually belonged to her. To simplify things for everyone, we suggested selling it to her or even trading it for part of her property. There's this part of her property that links up with ours, and honestly, it's such a hassle to manage. If we could just extend it a bit, it would make things way easier for us and give us some extra space to do the things we want. She outright rejected the idea, insisting that she would never pay for something that was already hers. There was no way she would consider giving us her property for free, especially after we had already taken it from her. Ever since, we've been caught up in this massive property dispute that just won't quit. Let me share a bit about my hometown. Like I said before, it's a super rural spot with some pretty odd property lines. Property lines can be pretty murky and complicated, not always straightforward. Numerous deeds date back centuries, and rather than specifying distances in feet and directions, they reference temporary landmarks such as a big oak tree to a large rock by the stream. A lot of these landmarks might refer to various things, or they could have vanished over a century ago. Honestly, calling the number of property disputes in our area a lot feels like a massive understatement. The reality that even a tiny piece of property can fetch a hefty price in certain scenarios has prompted our state to implement a range of stringent laws and regulations surrounding property disputes, surveyors, and more. Just a little tidbit, not too long ago, a landowner actually triumphed in a property dispute against a massive corporation over a mere 0.1 acres of land, which ended up costing the corporation and netting the guy over $1 million. Let's get back to the main discussion. With that in mind, our property lines were pretty straightforward since she established them not too long ago. Still, it doesn't alter the reality that the regulations surrounding it are quite stringent, especially regarding surveyors. A surveyor could definitely be swayed by a big corporation trying to avoid losing millions over a small plot of land. Just like in the example mentioned, that's just not right for the legitimate property owner. How do you manage to find that balance? So you set it up so that the surveyor has everything at stake if they decide to lie, and the same goes for the individual who tried to bribe or blackmail them. The regulations in our state state that if a surveyor, even through an honest error, provides an inaccurate survey by just a few feet, they can face a significant fine. However, they will face the consequence of losing their license and will be permanently barred from conducting surveys in the state. Additionally, they are required to inform and reimburse all their clients for a period of up to 10 years prior to the incident. The clients can choose to ask for another survey from an independent surveyor, but they'll have to cover the costs incurred by the original surveyor. We're talking about all customers, going back a decade before the incident and including everyone who came after. If they weren't caught taking a bribe or being blackmailed, the former clients could also go after them for any damages resulting from the inaccurate survey, including any adjustments to the property line and they could also demand fair rent for any property that the surveyor neglected during that period. If a surveyor is caught accepting a bribe or being blackmailed, then all damages and extra fees should be directed to the person who engaged in that bribery or blackmail as appropriate. The combination of wasted time and money spent in court, along with the overall hassle it brings, leads surveyors in my area to steer clear of anything that even hints at a property dispute. So when a disagreement popped up, you can bet it wasn't just a simple phone call to get a surveyor over here. It turned out to be an unplanned cost too. Unfortunately, before we could find someone, we ended up finding someone, and I guess she bribed them or something because they provided the property line exactly as described. So there was this one tiny detail she wasn't a fan of, but apparently she didn't bring it up with them. So it turns out our property line is just about a foot away from her house. That was a blast to mess around with. But that was nowhere close to the property she's actually trying to take from us. It's funny how every time we finally track down a surveyor, she casually introduces herself and mentions that she's already had her part of the property surveyed. Then she drops a few hints about a potential property dispute, almost like it's no big deal. This immediately drives away anyone who could be considering surveying our property. After breaking down what that could mean for them, I'm sure you get why. Oh, did I forget to mention that the land markers from the bank surveyor just vanished right before we moved in? Absolutely not. It's interesting how that came to be, isn't it? Looks like we might be left in the dark on this one. So, moving on, honestly, at this stage, hiring a surveyor might end up costing us as much as the land itself, if not more, and good luck finding someone who's even up for the job. Everyone we've come across so far has thrown out some completely absurd quotes, and it's pretty clear why. I mean, they're literally risking everything here. We're in the process of saving up to bring someone on board. And that leads us to just a few months back, the peak of this tale. Apologies for the lengthy setup, but let's dive into the main event now that we're all on the same page with the situation. A while back, a really intense storm rolled through and took down a tree on that property everyone's been arguing about. This tree was literally right next to the road, and when it fell, it totally wrecked part of our neighbor's property, the one who lives directly across the street from us. And to top it off, it ended up wrecking someone's shiny new sports car while they were just cruising down the road. Fortunately, everyone came out unscathed, but the cleanup ended up dragging on for several days. We just got hit with a bill in the mail for over $200K, which is honestly more than what our house and property are worth, even after all the renovations. Malicious. Just a bit of context for those who might be unfamiliar. Generally, your property or home insurance won't cover damages to someone else's property. That's usually your responsibility. Even if someone is on public property like a road, if your property causes damage to theirs and you could have reasonably prevented it, like cutting down a tree next to the road before a bad storm hits, you are completely responsible for the damages that result. Well, that's just how it goes in my neck of the woods. So when we received the bill in the mail from some wealthy person's insurance company for their wrecked sports car, we decided to give them a call and politely inform them that the tree that fell wasn't on their land. They hit us with some questions and mentioned they'd look into it and circle back to us. About a week later, we got another letter from the insurance company. It included a copy of the deed and a property line printout with the tree in question circled in red, clearly indicating that it was definitely on our property. They were insisting on receiving the entire payment within 30 days of their initial notice, or else they would pursue legal action against Oasis. It's been roughly 2 weeks now, more or less. We reached out to them again and reiterated that it wasn't on our property. Initially, the agent engaged in a bit of a debate with us, using far more diplomatic language than I will. They suggested that only someone completely out of touch would think the tree in question wasn't on our land. They emphasized that regardless of how inaccurate the property line might appear on the printout, it would be utterly implausible for anyone to genuinely believe it was that misaligned. We just passed along the contact info for the surveyor that N hired. They let out a sigh, mentioning they would reach out to the surveyor to dig deeper into the issue, but stressed that we had roughly 2 weeks to prepare the payment if our claims couldn't be verified. So we just never got a response from them after that. Don't forget about the repercussions I talked about for providing inaccurate survey responses. Even if the surveyor confessed to taking a bribe, there's no way they compensated him enough to cover all his potential losses. At this stage, it seems like he might need to pack his bags and head out of the country. There was absolutely no chance he would provide the insurance company anything other than what he shared with us or N. So we hit up the insurance company later to figure out what was going on with the issue. The agent looked quite pleased as they flipped through the notes, but they were tight-lipped about the details because of confidentiality rules. However, it was clear that N was not on board with the claim, just as we weren't, insisting that the property wasn't hers. The surveyor totally backed up the results with them. Given that we weren't disputing the survey results and that the surveyor was actually hired by N, there was absolutely no reason for the insurance company to think the results were inaccurate. As long as we're not arguing about the results, N should take full responsibility for all the damages caused by the fallen tree. They didn't have much else to add, but honestly, we were good with that. It turned out pretty much as we anticipated. The fallout. So, as you might gather from my backstory, N didn't really have a massive issue coughing up the cash to the insurance company, even though they clearly weren't thrilled about it. It's unclear how much cash they had stashed away, but it looks like they had enough to settle the debt without needing to offload any more of their property. We've kept a low profile regarding the property dispute, but we're still thinking about saving up to hire a surveyor to reclaim our land. Right now, it's really about the principle of the thing rather than the land itself. When it comes to N, it's pretty clear that whenever she glances our way, she's not happy with us at all. It's kind of wild that she's acting like we just gave her our land for no reason. I mean, it's free land. What's there to complain about? Haha. Right now, she might think about spreading rumors about us, but honestly, that would likely blow up in her face. We've built solid friendships with a good chunk of our neighborhood, and the trust in N has pretty much evaporated. Everyone's aware that R was actually stealing from people right under their noses, and the fact that they knew and did nothing to intervene has really changed the game. N is totally caught in a tough spot right now, and we're just sitting back and watching the chaos they created consume everything around them, super excited to find out what's coming up next. Hey, this is just a little bonus for anyone looking to spice things up a bit. After thinking it over, we opted for an invisible dog fence instead of a privacy fence for our pups. In case you're not familiar, it's basically a tiny electrical wire that you can bury underground. So you put this special collar on the dog, and if they get too close, it beeps, something the dogs definitely aren't fans of. If they continue, it will deliver a very gentle jolt to the dogs. We're not fans of shock collars, so we needed some convincing. One of us even held it and walked across the line. It was definitely something you could feel, but it wasn't painful, just left a little tingle. So like, you're really meant to get the dogs used to the beep before just letting them go with it. The goal is that they shouldn't even experience the shock at all. They should just hear the beep and turn around instead. We wanted to create a space where our dogs could enjoy the freedom of roaming around the yard instead of being stuck inside all day. Back then, we just didn't have the budget for a real privacy fence. We extended it deep into our yard, mainly because it wasn't too lengthy and also to keep our dogs away from N's place. N must have assumed we were indicating where to install our privacy fence or something because she accidentally mowed over it, even though it was well beyond the 5-foot mark she mentioned in relation to the B property line. That day taught us all a valuable lesson. Electrical lawnmowers and electrified wires do not mix well at all. Her mower was totally wrecked. All the electrical parts were completely shot, so she ended up having to get an entirely new mower. She just had to be petty and drive over our markers. The greatest thing about it is that it was so far over the property line that she couldn't possibly pin it on us. She definitely attempted to spread her rumors, but they didn't really gain any traction. It would have been totally ridiculous to put the blame on us when she didn't even make an effort. She never even brought up the idea of us getting her a new mower or anything like that. Seems like she was aware of our reaction if she went ahead with that. Haha. So yeah, I hope everyone liked the story. I've got another story to share about a different scenario where my mom's malicious compliance ended up costing her company more than $100 million and led to her entire department being completely and permanently shut down. It's getting late, so I'm heading to bed. I'll share that story tomorrow or whenever, so keep an eye out for it.